So, in my time at seminary, I found that I was not one of those students who would spend hours in the library, in the cubicle that they rented, that's a thing, poring over a lexicon or a dictionary or flashcards of the ancient languages that the Bible was originally written. I was kind of like a ninja in the library in that you would never see me there. Sorry, Barbara. Don't hold that against me. So I did study Greek and Hebrew, yes, but at that specific time in my journey and in my education, I didn't feel that it was adding a lot of, benefit. It wasn't adding much of anything to my already packed schedule. This is the semester I also had a German professor bluntly telling his class, which met twice a week, I would like to point out. Every week we would be told, all right, for this next class, you have 500 pages to read, be ready to discuss. Every class, okay? So we've got the German who wants discussions. I'm learning that Greek and Hebrew possess these things called cases. English doesn't do that, okay? I studied Russian in college. Russian does that, not to the extent of ancient languages. So to make a long story short, I decided that when it came to my theological education, I wanted to do something that wasn't going to require others to study in the depth that I had to. I was desperately seeking connection for all of this knowledge that I was absorbing in the classroom and desperately trying to find a place to put it into use. So in switching my degree from an MDiv, which is what most ordained ministers go for, I switched to a more broad program of study, just an MA in religion. And because I did that, I was able to shift my focus and take my learning out into the world. Little did I know, throughout this entire process, God would still be at work and be teaching lessons. So one such class that didn't require any Hebrew or Greek or any kind of background to that was a class that was an introduction to Islam at an evangelical seminary. So you see, I wanted to take Jesus with me wherever I went, like I said, even if that meant encountering siblings from another flock. So what initially drew me to this course was that students were required not just to learn about Islam from our specific Christian point of view. Spoiler alert, it boils down to it's wrong, don't bother. But instead of that, we were required to physically leave our seminary and go immerse ourselves in the Muslim world of the North Shore of Boston for at least one day. In order to pass the course, students not only had to do that, they also had to go and attend a mosque prayer service on a Friday. Since I'm live, thank you, Burlington Islamic Center. But in doing this, in getting out there, in going to mosque, in experiencing this, the biggest challenge of all was that we had to try and become friends with a Muslim. No strings attached. In hindsight, I would say that was probably the truest, biggest challenge for many folks in my class. If you've ever experienced theological education in the format that I did, the underlying current is always you take this and you go push it out there and you push it until people can't say no. And here I had this professor saying, go worship with people in a completely different religion and become friends with them. So again, you may have wondered, thought, okay, I know where this is going, but with my professor, it was never his intention that we proselytize. It was never his intention that we set out to convert people to Christianity. It was certainly never his intention that we used our theological education and training as a weapon, and it was never to be deceptive. It was his intention, however, to nudge us closer to the person and work of Jesus as we broke bread with those whom society, even a decade ago, deemed different, the other, or to some Christians, sinners. It was his intention for us to draw closer to the things of Jesus. I talk about them often: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, etc. We were to draw closer to the things of Jesus while breaking bread with those not of our tribe. It was his intention for us to be more mindful and drawing our family circle a little bit more widely. It was also his intention to teach us such a profound, unspoken lesson of God's kingdom. Wherever we go is not a solo journey. Wherever we go, God is alongside us. God is behind us. God is next to us. God is before us, clearing the way. In God, we find our true selves. In God, we are already so deeply loved by our Creator simply because. In God, we find our home. I'm not necessarily talking about a house in which humans abide. I'm talking about the feeling of peace and the feeling that the heart experiences when we are truly able to say that we are safe and truly ourselves. That ultimate expression of feeling at home should be in God's presence. It's the presence of God that says, I see you, my beloved. I know you more deeply than even you do. And you know what else? I'm closer to you than the very breath that you take. In me, you are home. I remember calling the Burlington Islamic Center a few days before I visited for the Friday prayer service. And the gentleman who answered was an elderly caretaker who, in this case, had a very particular love for Christians and Jews who found themselves visiting. For Muhammad, it was the things of the three Abrahamic faiths that we held in common that brought him joy. For this young evangelical Christian in his 20s, that was mind-blowing. Our culture had, and in many ways still, continually harps on the ways in which we are different, on the ways that separate us. And yet, the face-to-face human experience flipped the assumptions and stereotypes on their heads. I was met at the door with a hug and a cup of the most delicious tea I have ever tasted. I, to this day, have not been able to replicate it. From this experience, I was introduced to an Iranian-American family who, within 10 minutes of meeting, took me in as one of their own. This super-duper white guy from northern Maine got immersed in Persian food, Persian pop music. I learned about halal food and how to avoid certain things when you were out at the Stop and Shop. I learned firsthand how Muslims relate to God and how sacred their intimate moments with the Almighty are. Being Iranian American, my adoptive family are Shia Muslim, and within Islam, Shia, Sunni, Sufi, all the different branches, Jesus holds a very exalted place. In Shia Islam, especially in Iranian Shia Islam, Jesus is exalted as a prophet. I learned who Jesus was to Muslims. I learned about the 5 pillars of Islam: the profession of faith, prayer, charity, fasting, and pilgrimage. And I was able to personally be blessed from my Muslim families carrying out their faith whenever I was missing my own mom or my own dad, or when I had a cold, or I just needed to get off campus and be in an actual house for a while. Even though, by all accounts, I was not one of them, they didn't see it that way. They recognized the things of God at work. I recognized the things of God at work in them. We saw it in each other. And these things of God are not defined by dogma. They're not defined by religious doctrine. They're defined by hearts that are seeking God's kingdom. They're defined by hearts that are seeking love, that are seeking joy, and that are seeking grace. Having been so excited to learn about the Islamic world as best I could in Boston, I did this all at the beginning of my semester. A classmate of mine was truly intimidated by going to mosque, and when she was told that in order to pass the class you actually had to become friends with a Muslim, The color drained from her face. And I can still distinctly recall this shocking moment of vulnerability when, in the front of the entire class, she asked the professor what she should do because she was so unbelievably scared that she would get it wrong, or that it would go badly, or she would be treated badly. And our professor listened very intently, took everything in, breathed deeply, and then asked, "Do you believe that God is with you wherever you go?" And such a simple question rendered my classmate kind of like this. The deer in the headlights look. She blinked a couple of times and said, "Well, yes, of course, but it's just different from what I know." And as soon as she said it, it was like a light bulb went off over her head. It is different. That's humanity. It is different. Life may take you places that are frightening, that may make you uncomfortable, but you know what? It's not somewhere we ever go alone. Even when we feel our most afraid and abandoned, God will draw near because we are all part of God's kingdom. We all bear the image of the Creator, who is by very nature love and community. There isn't a VIP guest list or unwritten rules one must follow in order to be considered part of God's in-crowd. We are all born into God's kingdom because our membership is inherent. Our home base is already given. We are the Imago Dei. If I could, for just a moment, pause. I have a brief video from Rick Steves again this week, and he talks about celebrating family and finding family wherever you go. So let's take a listen.
But I'm lucky because on my very first trip, Tammy, when I was just a 14-year-old kid, my parents took me to see the relatives in Norway. And I was not only ethnocentric, I was egocentric. I mean, as you can imagine, a 14-year-old kid who had never been anywhere. And I was in a park. It's so interesting to think back on it. I was in a park behind the palace in Oslo. It's the Frogner Park. And it was filled with families out on a sunny afternoon. And I remember my parents were just loving me inexplicably. And I knew my mom and dad didn't have a lot of money. They had never been to Europe before. They had compromised hugely in their travels in order to take their son along and expose me to all of this. They were just loving me. I mean, just flat out crazy loving me. And I looked out in that park, and I still remember to this day, it was speckled like some sort of a idyllic Monet painting with all these other parents loving their kids as much as my parents loved me. And it occurred to me right then and there that, oh my goodness, this world, I never realized it, but this world is home to literally billions of equally precious, just as precious as little 14-year-old Rick, equally precious children of God. And for me to be burdened with that little bit of understanding has been a wonderful blessing, because it just reminds me of the richness of this planet. And it makes it so easy to see that we're all family. And again, comes back to that very simple appreciation of our relationship with our Heavenly Father. I mean, this is our creation. We're all children of God. And when we travel, we're celebrating the family.
We are billions of equally precious children of God. My classmate, as nervous as she was, put on a hijab and went to mosque with a few of us who'd already been. She made friends with an Egyptian family who I'm fairly certain keep in touch with her to this day. Nobody lost their religion. Nobody lost their identity, even though conversations may have been awkward and touchy due to a lack of understanding. Nobody was attacked or belittled. What did they gain? They gained a mutual love and friendship that surpasses any human-made barrier. They formed a bond that looks a heck of a lot like God's kingdom. In John's Gospel, Jesus says, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the vinegrower. He removes every branch in me that bears no fruit. Every branch that bears fruit, he prunes to make it bear more fruit. You have already been cleansed by the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me as I abide in you. Just as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. This isn't a passage describing who is in and who is out of a religious group. This is Jesus speaking to those whose hearts are seeking something that human systems of righteousness cannot satisfy. This is Jesus speaking to the life transformed by God's grace, whenever, wherever it may be. If you pursue love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, and charity in Jesus' name, you're spreading the kingdom. Not in a political sense, but in a very, very human sense. After all, that is what it is to be a follower of Jesus. You are the fruit of which Jesus speaks. Love for love's sake, joy for joy's sake, peace for peace's sake, being home to people that feel that they don't have anywhere to go. Be that light bringer, child of God. Just make sure, as you're doing so, to cast your eye, look around you. Look at those vines on trees who maybe don't look like you that are in process. Maybe the fruit's a little different, but it's still really good fruit. Remember, each of these different plants and vines and fruit all call the orchard home.